Good afternoon, everybody. We are so happy that you're here with us. Welcome to AALHE's webinar series. I'm Paula Haynes, one of the events committee volunteers with AALHE, and I'm so pleased that you're here with us today for our webinar on diversity, equity, and assessment. Before we get started, I have a few pieces of information for you. First, we are recording this webinar and it will be available to AALHE members on our website. Because of the number of participants today, you are all muted and we won't be doing any live questions. But if you do have a question, you can type it in the question box, which is on the bottom of the right-hand side of your screen. What you type won't be seen by the entire group, but I will be able to monitor this and ask questions to the presenters when there is an opportunity. You can also let me know through this question box if you are having any issues with the Zoom webinar technology. After the webinar is completed, you'll get an email from me with the PowerPoint slides and a link to an evaluation. Please take a few minutes to fill out our brief survey. AALHE does use these results to improve and better provide webinars to our community. And now it's time to begin. It is my great pleasure to introduce our presenter. Dr. Gianina Baker is the Assistant Director at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, which we all fondly know as NILOA. She holds a PhD in Educational Organization and Leadership with a higher education concentration from the University of Illinois, an MA in Human Development Counseling from St. Louis University, and a BA in Psychology from Illinois Wesleyan University. Gianina, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Paula, for the kind introduction. I'm excited to talk about equity and assessment and the work that we've been doing here at NILOA, and hopefully that bridges into some of the conversations that you're having on your own campus. That said, we first like to start with a poll, and I'll ask Paula to pull the poll up on the screen so that we can learn a little bit more about who's on the call today. So please, if you would, respond to the two questions. One, what type of institution, organization, or association commission do you represent? And two, to which accrediting body do you answer?
And Gianina, as people are answering the poll, we have a couple of folks saying that they're having a little trouble hearing you. So anything you can do to move closer to that mic will be great.
I will speak even louder.
Thank you. We'll give this poll just a few more seconds. And there we go.
Excellent. It looks like most of our attendees are from four-year colleges and universities, followed by some community college folks. They are near and dear to my heart. And then we can see a wide variety of accrediting agencies that are represented as well. So thank you. Thank you for completing that poll. I appreciate it. All right. Many of you signed up for the webinar, hoping, I guess, to have that discussion around equity and assessment. And you see the goals that are presented on your screen. But as Paula discussed, we really wanted to talk around what the authors, Eric Montenegro and Natasha Jankowski, provided in their paper and extend that conversation a bit. So the description of the webinar that you all had said yes to, right, stated that equitable assessment practices can be fostered in three ways: student learning outcome statements, assessment approaches, and use of assessment results, when infused with a cultural lens and view of students at the center. In addition to that, in today's webinar, we'll discuss the role that equity can play in moving towards culturally responsive assessment of student learning on college and university campuses. And lastly, I plan to share some practices that hopefully better connect, capture, and document what all students know and can do in both the curriculum and co-curriculum. Just to give you a bit of background information, NILOA was established in 2008 by Dr. Stan Eikenberry, former president of the University of Illinois, and George Koo, a prominent researcher in higher education literature, and is co-located at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and Indiana University Bloomington. We were formed in response to the Spellings Commission report that overly stated that not enough learning was happening on college campuses. And we were founded in anticipation of the Higher Ed Act being reauthorized so that we had evidence of authentic student learning when asked. NILOA's mission, as you can see on the screen, is to discover and disseminate effective use of assessment data to strengthen undergraduate education and support institutions in their assessment efforts. We accomplish our mission through the bulleted list. And as two-pronged as we are in both as a resource and research institute, we definitely consider ourselves to be responsive to the assessment field. So in terms of the equity conversation, we've been building a foundation of literature over the past few years that led up to Montenegro and Jankowski's paper. So let's take a look at some of those pieces. So first, we wrote some case studies quite a few years ago where we were wanting some examples of good assessment practice. And in fact, several institutions came to mind. So we decided to conduct some case studies of those institutions, and two of them, North Carolina A&T State University and Texas A&M International University, stuck out because their assessment process centered around their institutional context, particularly their students. We wrapped those cases and more into a larger analysis, and you can read the report using assessment results, promising practices of institutions that do it well, on our website under our report section that highlighted the good assessment practices that were found at those institutions and more. In addition to the case studies, we've conducted 3 surveys where we interviewed provosts or chief academic officers or their designates about their assessment approaches and practices institutionally. I'll talk more about that shortly, but I want to focus right here, right? After our second survey of provosts, Eric Montenegro, again, the author, one of the authors of the Equity and Assessment paper, wrote a paper then looking at assessment at minority serving institutions or MSIs. The 4 main findings included the internal use of assessment data at MSIs, using assessment data for improvement, the different assessment approaches at different types of MSIs, and subcategories of MSI's use of assessment to address different institutional needs and interests. I invite you to read that paper if you have some time. I think all of the papers that I have and will reference are located at the end of the slides in our references section. So don't worry if you're not sure what I'm talking about on some of these particular slides. So that brings us to our most recent report that was published in January of 2018. Because of our previous work, we knew that equity was becoming integral to much of the institution's work around assessment, and we wanted to survey to better understand how institutions viewed that work. A main finding of the 2017 survey data was that assessment continues to be driven by both compliance and improvement. However, now there's an emphasis on equity. While equity is an important consideration in assessment work, it is underemphasized in data use. We found that respondents indicated that addressing issues of equity was important to assessment efforts and disaggregation of evidence of learning by various groupings of students. However, using assessment data to support the achievement of equity goals was quite uncommon. Public institutions were more driven by equity concerns than their privates and for-profit counterparts. And likewise, minority serving institutions were more likely than PWIs or predominantly white institutions to indicate that equity concerns were a driver of their assessment efforts, often which support the college completion agenda. As Taraneshi and Bezbachenko confirm, an exploration of the the college completion agenda with an equity-minded lens focuses on the role of critical inquiry as a tool with which national priorities in higher education can help expand opportunity and mitigate inequality. But before we move ahead, let's take a brief moment to look at equity. There have been a variety of visuals over the past few years working to help people understand the difference between equality and equity. What is most important is that equality is not equity. Where in its simplest form, equality is about sameness, in these pictures and in the conversation and in dialogues that are happening across the country, you can see that equity is about fairness. And that brings us to today. I was asked if I might lead a conversation on equity and assessment. Hopefully you had the opportunity to read through Eric Montenegro, who is a NILOA graduate research analyst and currently our communications coordinator, and Natasha Jankowski, our current NILOA director. Hope you've read their paper, as it's been out since January 2017. If not, I urge you to read it to help give you a solid understanding of what is meant by culturally responsive assessment and all of the literature that helped inform that conversation. The primary research question of their paper is how consequential can assessment be to learning when assessment approaches may not be inclusive of diverse learners? So we'll take a quick look at what consequential assessment looks like in a moment if you're not familiar with that concept, but I want to point out two key points of their paper. Number one, to meet the goal of improving student learning and authentically documenting what students know and can do, a culturally responsive approach to assessment is needed. To support this idea, Carnevale and Stoll state that marginalized groups are concentrated at the lower ranks of the post-secondary education system in programs with low quality of student learning and poor records of student completion. And the credentials from these places offer little value in the labor market. And point number two, there's an assumption at play within the field of assessment that while there are multiple ways for students to learn, students need to demonstrate learning in specific ways for it to count. Again, Terenici and Bezbachenko agree that unfortunately one-size-fits-all practices of lumping together data for all students are often a mistake in that they produce poor policy choices and poor educational practices. So just to hop back to a definition of consequential assessment, as I think that it'd be valuable in this conversation, members of the NILOA team, as you can see, the founders of NILOA, as well as several of our directors and senior scholars, put together a definition that helps describe what consequential assessment, when done right, looks like. So they offer, to be consequential, assessment information needs to be actionable, focused on the needs and interests of end users, embedded in the ongoing work of teaching and learning, available in understandable forms, customized, and supported by institutional leaders. Keep that in mind as we continue to go through some of these slides. So as we move forward with our thinking around culturally responsive assessment, one quote that particularly sticks out for me in the paper is the following that you see on your screen. Assessment, if not done with equity in mind, privileges and validates certain types of learning and evidence of learning over others, can hinder the validation of multiple means of demonstration, and can reinforce within students the false notion that they do not belong in higher education. The main assumption that's illustrated in that last point is that while learners may take multiple paths to and through learning, they must demonstrate their knowledge and skills in the same way. I'd like here to just stop and think about a few other ways, right, that we can show that students are learning in different demonstrations. The Answer PhD is one of them, where students are offered the ability to through no written form, talk about their work through dance. I think that's an interesting concept and one that I would have liked to try. I also offer up Dr. A.D. Carson, a former doctoral student in the Rhetorics, Communication, and Information Design program at Clemson University, where for his dissertation, he wrote a digital archive of original rap music and spoken word poetry titled Owning My Masters, The Rhetorics of Rhymes and Revolutions. Definitely a monumental thing to do. and one that not many students have thought of, but absolutely demonstrated his learning and his discipline. There's several examples where faculty have allowed for various demonstrations of learning. In the paper that you read, the authors have included some international examples from the University of East London, University of Dublin, and Canada. I just want here to point out, though, that culturally responsive assessment is just that. It's when excellence meets equity. So now that we've delved a bit into assessment, let's break down what we mean by culturally responsive. Key to understanding some of these concepts are the author's definition of culture. While they acknowledge that one definition of culture doesn't quite suffice, they offer up 3 elements to help frame what a culture entails, using past definitions as reference points. You can see the 3 on your screen: implicit, explicit, and cognitive. The implicit elements are those that combine a group of people, which include their beliefs, values, ethics, identity, sexual orientation, maybe some common experiences, for instance, for military veterans and foster children. The explicit piece really looks at those that make people identifiable to a specific group. And that might include behaviors, practices, customs, roles, attitudes, appearance, expressions of identity, language, perhaps housing region, your heritage, race or ethnicity, rituals, and religion. And then lastly, the cognitive elements. It captures the ways that the lived experiences of a group of people affect their acquisition of knowledge, their behavior, cognition, communication, expression of that knowledge, perceptions of self and others, work ethic, and collaboration. Now moving to responsive. The authors use Khalifa, Gooden, and Davis's definition of responsive that describes it as an action-based, urgent need to create context and curriculum that respond to the social, political, cultural, and educational needs of students. It is affirmative and seeks to identify and institutionalize practices that affirm indigenous and authentic cultural practices of students. Using action research, Dowd, Bishop, and Bensimon talk about the use of language tools such as punches and fine-grained questions through dialogue to challenge these deficit-minded cultural assumptions and help reframe the discourse. Similarly, Pusser argues that in understanding power and using critical theory, our realities are arranged and systematized by and through language. I hope that you'll notice some of the similarities between the definitions that you see here around responsive and how we view consequential assessment. So, putting this all together, how does this inform what we term culturally responsive assessment? Montenegro and Jankowski set up some concepts to help us describe what this looks like. Culturally responsive assessment is thus thought of as an assessment that is mindful of the student populations the institution serves, using language that is appropriate for all students when developing learning outcomes, acknowledging students' differences in the planning phases of an assessment effort, developing and or using assessment tools that are appropriate for different students, and lastly, being intentional in using assessment results to improve learning for all students. And most importantly, are their students. Culturally responsive assessment requires their involvement in every step and builds upon their lived experience. The authors state an essential aspect of maintaining focus on students is truly understanding the student population at the institution and or level at which the assessment is being conducted. Once we understand who our students are, we can begin to tailor assessment processes and materials to have the greatest impact for their learning. So to reiterate, culturally relevant and responsive assessment involves assuring that the assessment process, beginning with student learning outcome statements and ending with improvements in student learning, is mindful of student differences and employs assessment methods that are appropriate for the various student groups that your institution encounters. So let's take a deeper look at these particular pieces of the assessment process and explore how we might work better to connect, capture, and document learning for all students. First and foremost is writing specific actionable learning statements. A key principle that's also in NILOA's policy statement on good assessment practice. The report that I'm actually referencing is located on your screen there. Writing specific actionable learning statements that align with assignments, evaluative criteria, and institutional and departmental goals need also to be culturally responsive. How does this happen? When students know what is expected of them. Student agency increases when we write learning outcome statements for and with our students. When institutions are able to write such learning outcome statements, worlds of opportunities open up. For instance, NASPA and APRO's Comprehensive Learner Record Project to capture, record, and communicate learning when and where it happens. It's optimized when institutions are specific about what they want their students to know and be able to do upon graduation. A few examples of such end products follow. You'll see here that with the help of a vendor, Elon University built a user-friendly web platform where student information experiences are uploaded on an Excel spreadsheet that's created into a PDF infographic once they had defined specific learning outcomes and then mapped them to curricular and co-curricular experiences. Students have to opt in to receive the co-curricular transcript. Then it's released as a part of a PDF file that includes both the academic and experiential transcript. As you can see on this first page, front page is the visual transcript that lists out the experiences. While on the second page, it actually presents a summary of each experience. You can see that this could be used in a variety of ways, not just for the student and the institution, but also for potential employment or further graduate studies. The University of Central Oklahoma, they developed an innovative second transcript that records student growth and learning beyond their major. It's called the Student Transformative Learning Record, otherwise pronounced as STELLAR. And it aims to track, document, and verify student learning across their five of their value tenets. The first five are global cultural competencies, health and wellness, leadership, research, creative and scholarly activities, and finally service learning and civic engagement. They actually also have a sixth tenet, discipline knowledge, and that itself is recorded in the traditional academic transcript. Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, or IUPUI, developed 6 principles of undergraduate student learning almost 20 years ago. These principles have guided the development of learning outcomes that are aligned between course, program, and university levels. The Office of Student Affairs later adopted these 6 principles and added 2 more to establish what was known as their 8 principles of co-curricular learning. This record that you see before you is one that they've done within the project and provides some information on a student's experience. And in fact, on the second page, presents that data and is a visualization, just so that it's easily digestible for readers, right? This record itself was developed before IUPUI actually recently approved its new profiles of learning for undergraduate success, otherwise known as IUPUI Plus. So I'll be interested to see what develops. Building off another NILOA principle of good assessment practice in our policy statement of connecting learning goals with actual student assignments and work, the authors of the paper point out that rubrics, portfolios, and e-portfolios, and capstones as assessment approaches that when developed in a culturally conscious process allow for students to make connections between classroom and co-curricular experiences, theoretical knowledge, and real-world situations. There are many more experiences that can be looked at that also provide that deep integrative learning experience for students. So let's take a look. Some institutions have found value in understanding more about their students' experience with on-campus employment, allowing students to reflect on their varied experiences and work to translate what they've learned on the job into the classroom reaps longitudinal benefits. The University of Iowa's initiative, known as Iowa Grow, and University of Wisconsin-Madison's initiative, known as We Grow, are just 2 that are designed to do just that. Iowa Grow asks just 4 questions. How is the job fitting in with your academics? What are you learning here that's helping you in school? What are you learning in class that you can apply here at work? And can you give me a couple of examples of things you've learned here that you think you'll use in your chosen profession? A few of the assessment approaches that were just discussed are described as high impact practices, also known as HIPs, and are active learning practices that educational research suggests increased rates of student retention and student engagement. Some work conducted by the Indiana University Center for Post-Secondary Research concluded that students of color generally do experience positive impacts when HIPs are incorporated into their learning experiences than same-race peers who do not. That said, Patton, Harper, and Harris, in the 2015 piece in the Critical Approaches to the Study of Higher Education book, raised several questions about the students of color engagement with HIPs. They used critical race theory to deconstruct several hot topics, including college access and admission, college student development, and, of importance here, college student engagement. Not only do they shed light on aspects of students' experience not often documented with HIPs, they also share 9 tenets of critical race research that are quite applicable to this conversation. Thus, I invite you to read more of their work if this piques your interest. Moving to the last piece that we'll discuss around fostering culturally responsive assessment is around the use of assessment results. One piece that institutions continuously struggle with in thinking about how to use evidence of student learning to improve on their campus. As we discussed in the NILOA policy statement that we referenced earlier, we keep referencing to, another principle in a document is to design assessment approaches that generate actionable evidence about student learning that key stakeholders can understand and use to improve student and institutional performance. This is best done through disaggregation of data by student population. In fact, again, Teranishi and Bezpachenko agree that disaggregation of data needs to be a deliberate and normalized practice. Why do this, you might ask? Most importantly, it's to check our assumptions. Going again back to our most recent survey data, we found that 77% of institutions reported that they were currently mapping their curriculum. Why is that important here? Mainly because through the process, through the assessment process and through the mapping process, we asked, what is it that we are expecting students to know and be able to do upon entry in this course? Does that come from our program, course, institution, or somewhere else? Or in other words, do our assumptions about alignment actually hold? And by examining our assumptions, we ask, how and what do we think about our students? Where do we think learning occurs? What is our theory of change? What we hope to achieve through mapping is alignment, whether that's within a program, between general education and larger institutional goals, between co-curricular and co-curricular learning. Yule states, that through mapping, hopefully you're able to identify where and how particular outcomes are expected, explicitly taught for, and assessed. You can also achieve, through mapping, some backwards design, and hopefully a better understanding about the nature and role of course prereqs. What is mapping? Mapping is the process of seeing relationships and is a key strategy for examining the alignment of the different elements of learning environments. And again, most importantly, helps us unpack associations about our own and others' roles and contributions to the learning of students. What can be mapped? Pretty much anything. Content, structures, course seeking patterns, assignment timing, co-curriculum, whatever you deem at your institution and where you want to really be able to see relationships between certain items, mapping is a very useful tool. In fact, we can ask, does a curriculum map inherently assume that academic affairs is at the expense of student affairs or other institutional elements, potentially employment or others? The mapping tools that follow and even more examples can be found on our website if you're interested in this work and you want to see how other institutions are conceptualizing this work. On your screen is just an example of a two-dimensional curriculum map where learning outcomes are placed on the left-hand side and course and other co-curricular information follow in the remaining rows. And this curriculum map General education and major courses are mapped to particular learning outcomes, along with co-curricular activities and experiences that support those outcomes. You'll also see an additional curriculum where you could put possible career paths that are related to the map for students. Expanding on the previous map, we've added some columns for work-based learning experiences, certifications, and licensures, as well as a column where learners can identify elements of their own experience, outside of those that are already listed, that contribute to the specified learning outcome. And based off that last column of learner identified, we continually ask the question, where does learning happen? Institutions like the University of Minnesota Rochester and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign have asked students what learning looks like for them. By better understanding these pieces, we are much more able to map learning throughout the curriculum and co-curriculum. And this supports another NILOA principle of good assessment practice, collaborating with the relevant stakeholders, beginning with the faculty, and of course, incorporating students. Now, this is a topic that's definitely growing in importance. And I think within the curriculum mapping process, if we take a culturally responsive approach, we can also work to decolonize the curriculum. Though this requires a sustained and serious commitment within the institution, we get at key elements of who to teach, what we teach, and how we teach. There is definitely a decolonization movement happening particularly to the curriculum as advocates work to decolonize where learning happens and better understand the hidden curriculum and the values of a college and or university. In fact, Husser explores how critical approaches allow us to conceptualize issues that are not able to rise to the level of policy contest, to potential decisions that never reach the agenda, to voices unheard, and to the discourses and practices that instantiate the beliefs and interests of dominant groups. Again, involving students by creating a space for critical engagement, especially around the curriculum, only increases their agency. Most recently, ACPA, or the American College Personnel Association, had a 2-year college drive-in conference with the theme of Decolonizing Practice and Promoting Racial Justice in Community Colleges. Co-sponsored by the Office of Community College Research and Leadership here at the University of Illinois and Joliet Junior College, where this and other topics were designed to learn how community colleges, particularly, can serve as agents for racial justice and decolonization. On your screen, you can see a document from ACPA that spells out their work around racial justice and decolonization, especially if you want to get engaged with this work. I also wanted to provide you with some additional resources. The Association of American Colleges and University, or AACNU, provided a campus guide for self-study and planning specific to committing to equity and inclusive excellence. These might serve as a reference point for your own work on your campus, and they highlighted some institutions that were doing this work, and some of the assessment processes were actually highlighted as a piece of that. So definitely, if you're interested in this work and want to learn more, I invite you to read more on that. So to conclude, I hope you have a better idea of what culturally responsive assessment is. I hope you have an idea of how we map that relationship between equity and assessment, and have now had some examples of how you can, again, document learning where it happens for all students. Because this conversation is still evolving, we definitely invite others to join us in the conversation. Several authors have wrote in response to Montenegro and Jankowski's paper to delve into what culturally responsive assessment frameworks or models could look like, which included principles and assumptions and definitions. Some even wrote in dialogue with each other. We actually kicked off the series with a video response from Dr. Ebony Zamani Gallagher, current director of the Office of Community College Research and Leadership and professor in the Education Policy, Organization, and Leadership department here at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. We've included responses from Dr. Gavin Henning and Dr. Ann Lundquist on moving towards socially just assessment by examining various terminology and concepts in the field and existing on a continuum. And it's characterized by increasing levels of individual action to address. You can actually see what that looks like on the screen. The visualization that they provided in their response is up there for you to view. And if you're interested, you can even write a response to that. And we'll continue to gather dialogue from others in the field. We'll soon release our latest response, written by Sophie Tullier, on the importance of understanding the epistemology of the assessment professional. There was a recent dialogue that was happening on the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders, or SAL listserv, on this very topic, of which I hope those that are pondering similar questions will consider submitting a response. So that said, I want to leave you with some questions. Not that you have to answer today, but potentially if you're just starting this conversation and want to take it back on your own campus, how can you assist in creating experiences that will elicit student demonstration, not limit it, of a specific learning outcome? How can you plan to continue these conversations on your own campus? What challenges can you foresee? What opportunities can you leverage to keep that the work moving forward? And then lastly, what resources and tools do you need to do so? As I stated earlier, we are definitely a research institute and are very much into feedback. And as you work on this yourself, what is it that you need to be able to do the work? Let us know. We're always open to that, because we want definitely to hear how you're working on it, how you're conceptualizing it, but then how we can get it to move forward. So I want to leave some time for questions or dialogue from some of you, in case you've asked questions. I haven't been able to see any of those, so I'll ask Paula to perhaps provide some of the questions to me, and we can begin some of that question and answer. But I'll leave you with just a few notes here. On the left-hand side is our website. If so interested and you want to stay updated with the information that we publish, please click on the Join Our Email list on our website, and the link, learningoutcomesassessment.org, is where you can find us. Click on that Join Our Email list and we'll add you. We have about at least 10,000 subscribers that we send out our monthly newsletter to, and that's where any new publication or update to any of our toolkits or responses, equity responses, we post. So I definitely invite you there. My email address is also listed in case you have further questions and want to follow up via email. And we also invite you to dialogue with us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can see our information there. So that said, Paula, are there any questions you'd like to start with?
So we have 2 questions already in the queue, and I'll read those out so that everybody can know what we're talking about. And I invite folks to continue posting your questions there, and we will just keep going through them as time allows. So our first question is, how do we balance the pressure from a compliance point of view with direct demonstrable learning, in other words, accreditation, with providing students with more opportunities for sharing where learning happens and what it looks like for them? So balancing that pressure from here is the requirement for what we demonstrate, and then the wanting to be more open-handed with opportunities for sharing and alternative kinds of learning situations.
Great questions. Great questions. The very first part of the question brought me back to, again, our policy statement. Again, those 5 principles of good assessment practice. While I didn't go through all of the principles, the one that I love most is that if you focus on improvement, compliance will take care of itself. And I think that's important for us to remember. I know that there are those reporting mandates that need to happen and get done, But I think if we do this because we want to do the work, oftentimes the reporting will work itself out. But again, then we focus on our students through that process. I think that we have to also understand that students are our biggest advocates. The more that they know about what they're being asked to do and can explain that, as we think about what's happening nationally around higher education and the conversation, is it worth it? What value does it add to students? We set ourselves up, if we do this right, to have students advocating on behalf of higher ed, right? Our alums are biggest examples of what learning can happen at an institution. So I think, considering again that if we focus again on improvement, compliance will take care of itself, and that the more that we put into our students, again, the more benefits we reap, we can hopefully get to the point where we're sharing and communicating those stories better. Something that we found even in our survey is that we just haven't been, as the field and as institutions work on all of gathering the data and documenting it and showing how they've been using it to improve, we haven't done as well actually communicating that. Some of the work that we've been doing around evidence-based storytelling, hopefully we'll have some toolkits and other materials out which get exactly at that point, right? How do we tell these stories that integrate several pieces of what's happening at our institution, considering our context, considering mission, students, all of those pieces? Definitely still a work in progress. We're definitely seeing some examples start to come out of institutions that are doing a decent job. I think if you look at our Excellence of Assessment designees, they're actually located on our site underneath the transparency framework. If you look at those institutions, they've done a really good job writing a coherent, concise narrative of what assessment looks like on their campus. And I definitely invite you, if you've not applied for that designation, to consider that. Helps you think about, again, your context, your philosophy around assessment, and potentially helps you think about how you might communicate that out to others.
Great, and thank you so much for that. And we can't shy away from the complexity, even though it makes our work so hard.
It is. That's why we love it.
Exactly. Another question here: how does this framework integrate research about how students learn differently? So what is the connection between this research and research about the differences in student learning?
Another good question. I think this research acknowledges that students learn differently. Thus, when you assess them, you can't then use the exact same methods for every student, because that then contradicts with what we know about learning. I definitely would invite some. We don't have quite as many pieces right now on that particular piece around that, but I invite you to think about that in relation to the paper and write a response. Even if you're looking at some of the other responses that are on the site currently in dialogue, either you agree or disagree with some of those responses, definitely would also accept those. But I think we definitely acknowledge that in the paper, but we could definitely pull that piece out even more.
Okay. We have a comment here, and then some other questions have come up too. A comment and a question. I think it's important to be sure that there is equity in assessment within traditional classroom assessment. Simply finding other extracurricular ways for students to demonstrate learning outside the classroom will not address this important issue. So a pedagogy of this kind of decolonized curriculum is necessary to accompany our assessment efforts. That's a great point, I think.
I would agree.
Here's a question. How might you initiate or facilitate this critical conversations on culturally responsive assessment on a campus whose departments and inclusion efforts are mostly siloed?
That's a lot of campuses. Sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure if we could have people raise their hands, you would not feel alone in that conversation. I think, first of all, it sounds like you have a really good understanding of where your institution is. There are definitely some places that you could start. One thing that comes to mind is the new University of Southern California, sorry. They just released a climate survey that at least helps you take stock of what's happening on your campus, and then perhaps go in with some of these conversations, because it's a little hard sometimes to think about how and where to start with this. I think for us here at NILOA, we've definitely taken the approach that we need the support from leadership. We need, obviously, resources. We need time and space to get this work done. But again, if you think about that principle and collaborating with relevant stakeholders, beginning with the faculty are huge in this work. So to follow up with the comment that Paula also talked about, I think some of the work that we've done around assignment design could really get at some of the points that you've made. In our assignment design charrettes, and the information is also located in a toolkit on our website, we work with faculty to bring assignments that they like, but they're not really sure it's doing what they want it to do. And that's brought into a peer review process with other faculty members. So potentially, if you're really wanting to emphasize, again, culturally responsive assessment, perhaps this is a place where that could be the focus. And as you're working on the assignments, this is a space where the connections can be made. From there, in that charrette, faculty give a description of the assignment itself, and then the other the faculties that are around the table ask questions, right? Clarify some of the instructions that are listed in the assignment, give different ideas. So potentially, I've seen where the assessment of the particular assignment changes, right? So perhaps it was, they started with a writing sample at the beginning, it had to be writing, and here's the instructions. And towards the end of the conversation, they're now thinking about, what if we change this into a flyer? Again, not saying that the rigor of the assignment is down, not saying that you lessen that assignment, but instead thinking about, you're being a bit more critical and conscious and thinking about what it is that you're asking students to do, and then making an assessment that's appropriate and helping them demonstrate what they actually know and can do. So I think some of the work around assignments, getting at faculty, of course, assisting students in understanding what learning outcomes even mean in a course, on a syllabus, in the program, institutionally, again, only helps them not only in their courses become agents, but again, once they graduate out, they're able to, again, talk about what it is that they know and can do as a result of being at your institution.
Great. We have 4 questions queued up right at this moment, so let's see if we can get to them. We'll do what we can. If we don't get to your question, we'll try to communicate that out so that you can have some kind of answer via email. A question here, could you share a bit about the identities of the group that built the culturally responsive assessment framework? What kind of consultation with equity-seeking groups has happened or is planned?
Great question. Great question. I think if you read further into Patton, Harper, and Harris's work, that's exactly what they get at, right? A lot of what's been done, especially around something like high impact practices, who's been involved in that, who's deemed that this is high impact. I think asking those questions definitely get at what we're trying to work with within as we talk about culturally responsive assessment. In this particular paper, if that's what you're asking, Eric Montenegro and Natasha Jankowski, who you can see on our website, were the primary authors of the paper. Obviously, they've incorporated a lot of voices into the paper itself, and in some ways, obviously, are limited in their experiences. Obviously, their experiences are very much also valued, and that's one reason they're seeking responses to this particular paper, because we realize we haven't captured, and I'm not sure we could ever capture everyone's experience, but we would love more. So again, I invite you particularly to add to the conversation pieces that might be missing, pieces that, maybe are solidified as we think about what this framework actually could look like. Having more examples and evidence around that would be extremely helpful. So please, again, I invite you to dialogue with us.
Okay. We have a few folks here who are hoping that you can point them to resources, and I'm sure you'll do what you can and refer us to the resources that are already online where you need to. But let's see if you have any immediate reactions to these particular requests. Can you give some examples of assignments you might use to assess students' capacity for scholarly writing within a culturally sensitive framework?
Ooh, that's a good one.
These are tough.
I will actually point you to a resource on our site. So if you see the degree qualifications profile tab, we have within that an assignment library. So from some of the assignment charrettes that we've conducted, we've gathered some of the revised assignments from faculty in various disciplines through the associate, bachelor, and master's degree level. They're tied to our degree qualifications profile, which you can learn more about as well. And that looks at what students should know and be able to do at the associate, bachelor's, master's degree level. But in the assignment library itself, there's assignments to each of those, and some of that is towards writing. And I think those would be a great place to start to look at and see some of the peer-reviewed assignments that are there. We also have a couple of featured assignments that might be useful as you're thinking about what the process looks like. I think, I don't think, I can't be 100% sure, but I can't say that within any of the assignment charrettes that the equity was a particular focus on, and as you're there thinking about the assignment. However, it's not to say that you couldn't take an assignment that is currently in the library and conduct that. I think that would be definitely an appropriate place to start and to help inform the conversation. And I'd love to hear if you do that.
Great. Another attendee is asking if you could provide or point us to any examples of learning outcomes being revised to be equitable and inclusive.
I think that's a constant process. I would definitely point you to many of the minority serving institutions that the two that we discussed, right? But there's even more, specifically and particularly historically Black colleges and universities and tribal colleges and universities, even religious institutions that are very specific in knowing, again, who their students are and what they want those students to know and be able to do upon graduation. So I think there's some really good examples that are out there, but I think more are revising theirs currently. A lot of them, if you look, they're in process of thinking about that. But I think if you wanted to go to a great example right now, definitely some of those institutions are a good place to start.
Great. One question here now. Do you know of any education programs that are starting to integrate this into their curriculum so that future teachers and faculty are developing culturally responsive assessments? Are there any leaders out there in the preparation of our future education faculty?
Oh gosh, yes. K-12 especially, they've been talking about culturally responsive assessment and pedagogy and what all of this looks like for quite a while. Definitely a part of the teacher education program, right? It's a bit slower moving for graduate school. If you think about it, faculty themselves are taught in their subject matter, not in assessment. So often that's an added value, I would like to think, later on as they get into their work at their institution. We definitely have been seeing more of an increase. Even the Council for Graduate Schools released a paper, it was at least a year ago, around articulating learning outcomes. We're starting to see even more graduate programs start to define at least what their learning outcome statements are, and that will push some of their assessment approaches and plans and process down the line. But I think that they've been at least working, and I've seen an increase specifically around law studies, legal studies. So I'm encouraged by what is out there. I think there's obviously more that we can do, not only with graduate programs, thinking about our, teaching assistants, thinking about just future educators, preparing future faculty. That's a piece of our work that we're definitely trying to institute. But it's a little hard. There's a lot of moving pieces within that, but obviously of interest to us.
Thank you. Now we have 2 open questions, and I think we can combine them. So let me give you them both at once and see if you can digest this. One attendee is asking, how have other institutions implemented experiential learning or co-curricular learning into the documentation of student learning? So I know that when everybody gets the slides, they'll have lots of great examples from University of Central Oklahoma and IUPUI about that. And so maybe if you have other ideas to tell us those as we wrap up. And then the final question here is thanking you for the talk, which we all do, and saying assessing student learning outside the classroom is crucial but very challenging. We have structures and processes in place for assessment of student learning within a classroom setting, and the people tasked with this assessment are trained in pedagogy. What are the structures and processes required to allow such assessment of student learning to extend outside of the classroom, particularly if the metrics become part of the student's official record? Who conducts the assessment? How are they trained? How are the standards set and communicated? Specific examples would be helpful.
Of course. And one thing that I will work to do in the slides itself is provide links. If I haven't already in some of the spaces, I'm thinking particularly around the NASPA-ACRA work around comprehensive learner records, because I think the examples there would be of much value to many of you as you're trying to just think about what this work looks like on your campus, because it looks different everywhere you go. In that initial work, they had about 12 pilots, and I think that work it started a couple years ago, and so they've continued to grow, and especially those 12 pilot institutions have really led that space. That said, they've been working with about close to over 100 institutions in this next round of getting them to that space. But again, it's crucial that you have the specific actionable learning outcome statements, or that work can't be done. So if you're not ready for that, if you don't have those outcomes defined and moving along, that work is very hard to conduct. So I'll include some links there, and I think there's various institutions that I think that you can learn from there. In terms of the other question around collaborating with student affairs and academic affairs, I think what's important to understand is that a lot of this work has been done in student affairs and it's been documented for a while, but there just hasn't been the gap hasn't bridged yet around that work. And I think as we really start to think about it, and if we acknowledge that learning can happen anywhere, not just in the classroom, that then allows us to really explore at the institution where it happens. And many times it's in a co-curricular space. Oftentimes as well, in the classroom, faculty aren't able to do everything. They're not able to get to every learning outcome, right? How could they partner with student affairs to provide those additional experiences that would enhance what's being learned in the classroom? So again, I think opening the door for those conversations, again, allowing time and space for those conversations that can happen, allows for us to begin bridging that gap that exists at many institutions. And student affairs on their own, they're working a lot on what assessment looks like for them on their experiences, not just participation, right? Thinking about real engagement and what that means for students on their campus, and how they can write rubrics, and how they can work with faculty to, again, enhance the experience for students that's outside the classroom. So I think there are many examples that are happening. I'd invite you, we have some on our site, again, the excellence in assessment designees often have a strong relationship with student affairs, but also I think if you look at NASPA's assessment work, assessment and persistence work, if you look at some of the ACPA Assessment Institute, if you look at the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders listserv, there are many examples of where this is happening. Again, we just got to work to bridge the gap. All right.
You've given us so much to work with today, Gianina. Thank you so much. We have all of these wonderful questions still pouring in for you, but we will have to table them for today and have you back another day. You've given us so much to think about and to work hard on our campuses to make sure that our assessment efforts are equitable and culturally responsive for the benefit of all of our students. Don't forget, attendees, I'll be sending out an email with a link to the recording for AALHE members and the slides and a link to the evaluation, which we'd really appreciate you filling out. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.